The first time Chris kissed me in public, it was supposed to be a joke. Not a romantic, heart-stopping moment. Not that kind of kiss. Just a quick, casual press of his lips to mine in the middle of a crowded bar, done purely for show. Purely strategic. Purely fake. Except the room went quiet in my head the second it happened. I still remember the smell of cheap beer and citrus cleaner, the low bass thumping through the floor, and the way his hand landed on my waist like it already belonged there. Too natural. Too practiced. And when he pulled back, grinning like he'd just won something, I realized I'd forgotten how to breathe. That was the moment everything started going wrong. The idea itself was simple. Harmless, even. Chris and I had been friends for almost 3 years by then. We met at work, same department, same long hours, same shared hatred of our boss. He was the kind of guy everyone noticed without him even trying. Tall, broad-shouldered, that annoying, effortless confidence. I was not that. More quiet, more observant. The guy who listened instead of talked. We balanced each other out. When the company announced they were offering a housing stipend, but only for couples willing to relocate for a long-term project, Chris was the one who laughed first. "That's such bullshit," he said, scrolling through the email on his phone. "They really think a ring and shared rent makes people more stable?" I shrugged. Welcome to corporate logic. We were sitting in his car outside our apartment building, engine still running, neither of us in a rush to go upstairs. That was normal for us. Half our conversations happened parked like that, windows cracked, lives on pause. A few seconds passed. Then Chris tilted his head, like he was turning an idea over. "You know," he said slowly, "they don't actually say anything about proof." I looked at him. "Proof of what?" He smiled. That dangerous, half-serious smile. "Proof that you're really a couple." I laughed. Hard. "Okay, and what?" "We hold hands and fool HR. I mean," he said, shrugging, "we already live together. Split groceries. Know each other's schedules. We'd save a ton of money. And honestly, we'd crush that project." I should have shut it down right there. Instead, I asked, "You're serious?" Chris nodded. Dead serious. I stared out the windshield, my reflection faint in the glass. The idea felt ridiculous. Absurd. And yet, my chest was tight in a way that had nothing to do with logic. People would assume, I said carefully. "Stuff." "So," he replied immediately. "Let them." That should have been another red flag the way he didn't hesitate. The way he didn't seem bothered by the implication at all. I told myself it was just confidence. Just Chris being Chris. By the time we submitted the paperwork, it already felt like we were playing roles. We practiced little things without ever admitting it was practice. Standing closer in elevators. Using we instead of I when coworkers asked questions. Laughing things off. Creating a shared history on the fly. It was supposed to stay professional. Strategic. Temporary. We even set rules. No flirting when we were alone. No unnecessary touching. No selling it. Unless other people were around. Chris was the one who suggested the rules, which made me trust him more than I probably should have. "This is a game," he said one night, leaning against the kitchen counter. "We play it smart, get the benefits, then walk away." "Right," I agreed. A game. But games have winners and losers. And sometimes, someone forgets they're playing. I didn't know yet which one of us would be the problem. I just knew that the first time Chris slipped his arm around my shoulders in front of someone else, my body reacted faster than my brain. And that scared the hell out of me. The thing about pretending is that your body doesn't always get the memo. At first, it was easy, almost fun. Chris would throw an arm around me when coworkers were nearby or casually reach for my hand during group dinners like it was second nature. I told myself it was muscle memory from years of being close friends, that it didn't mean anything. But then there were moments when no one was watching. Like the morning he came out of his room shirtless, hair still damp from the shower, and asked if I wanted coffee. Normal roommate stuff. Except he stood way too close while waiting for the kettle, shoulder brushing mine, not moving away, not apologizing. I noticed everything. The heat, the quiet, the way he glanced down at my mouth for half a second longer than necessary. I told myself I was imagining it. We got approved for the stipend faster than expected. HR barely blinked. A few fake smiles, a couple of "that's so nice" comments, and suddenly we were officially registered as a couple on paper. That night, Chris came home with a bottle of cheap champagne. To us, he said, popping it open in the kitchen. To fraud, I replied, raising an eyebrow. He laughed, clinking his glass against mine. To winning. We drank more than we should have. Not sloppy, just loose enough that the edges softened. We ended up on the couch, feet stretched out, some random show playing in the background neither of us was actually watching. You okay with all this? He asked suddenly. I turned to him. With what? With people thinking. He gestured vaguely between us. That we're together. I hesitated. Too long. Chris noticed. He always did. Hey, he said, quieter now. If this is weird for you, Dash. No, I cut in too fast. It's fine. I just wasn't expecting how real it feels. That was the wrong thing to say. His eyes softened, something unreadable flickering there. Yeah, he murmured. Same. The silence after that felt heavier than it should have. The first crack in the rules happened a week later. We were at a work mixer downtown, one of those events where everyone pretends to relax while subtly networking. Chris had been drinking, smiling, charming everyone like usual. I stuck close, playing my part. At some point, someone asked how long we'd been together. Chris didn't even look at me before answering. Almost a year. My heart skipped. That wasn't part of our agreed timeline. I laughed it off, squeezed his hand. Time flies. The lie slid too easily off my tongue. Later, outside the bar, the night air cool against my skin, I finally said something. Since when is it a year? Chris leaned against the brick wall, hands in his pockets. It sounded better than 6 months. You're improvising, I said. That's not great. He smiled, but there was something tight behind it. Relax, Matt. No one's fact-checking our relationship. I crossed my arms. That's not the point. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the beer on his breath, see the tiny scar near his eyebrow I'd known forever. Then what is, he asked. I didn't answer. Couldn't. For a second, I thought he might kiss me right there. The tension sat between us, thick and dangerous. Instead, he stepped back. Sorry, he said. Didn't mean to push. We walked home in silence. That night, I lay awake listening to him move around his room across the hall. A door opening, a light clicking off, the soft thump of him sitting on his bed. I kept thinking about how easily he'd lied, how natural it sounded, how comfortable he'd been saying we'd been together for a year. I wondered if that scared me more than the fact that part of me liked hearing it. The next morning, he was distant, polite, back to being just my roommate. And somehow, that hurt more. That's when I started to realize the problem wasn't the game anymore. It was that I didn't know if Chris still thought it was one. If I'm being honest, the worst part wasn't the tension. It was the pretending outside, the pretending. Chris started pulling back when we were alone. No more lingering in the kitchen. No casual shoulder bumps in the hallway. He still played the part perfectly in public, hand on my lower back, fingers laced with mine under tables, but the second the door closed behind us, it was like a switch flipped. And that messed with my head way more than if he'd just stayed the same. One night, about 2 weeks later, we were both working late. Laptops open on opposite ends of the dining table. The apartment quiet except for typing and the hum of the fridge. It felt normal again. Safe. Too safe. You're quiet, I said without looking up. So are you, he replied. Fair. He glanced over in Nui. He was focused on his screen, jaw tense, one leg bouncing under the table. I'd seen that look before. It usually meant he was thinking about something he didn't want to say. Did I do something? I asked. His fingers paused over the keyboard. Slowly, he leaned back in his chair. No, he said. Then, after a beat, no, you didn't. That wasn't reassuring. Chris. He exhaled through his nose, rubbing a hand over his face. I just think we need to tighten things up. Tighten what up? The rules, he said. We're getting sloppy. I stared at him. You're the one improvising timelines. I know, he snapped, then softened immediately. That came out wrong. Silence stretched between us. What are you really saying? I asked. He hesitated, long enough that my chest started to ache. I'm saying, he said carefully, that this only works if we remember why we're doing it. And why is that? I asked, even though I already knew. For the benefits. The project. The money. He met my eyes. Not because it feels good. There it was. I swallowed. Does it feel good to you? He didn't answer right away. That told me everything. The breaking point came on a Friday night. We were invited to a coworker's birthday party, small apartment. Too many people, not enough seating. Chris stayed close the whole time, arm draped over my shoulders like it belonged there. Everyone knew us as the couple by now. At some point, someone made a joke about how inseparable we were. Chris laughed. Yeah, he's kind of stuck with me. He doesn't look like he minds, someone said. Chris looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a split second, the noise faded. The smile on his face softened into something warmer, something dangerous. I don't, I said quietly. The words were barely audible, but he heard them. The rest of the night was a blur. We left early, the walk home heavy with unsaid things. As soon as the apartment door closed behind us, Chris turned. Matt, he said. I didn't let him finish. I know, I said, voice tight. I know this was supposed to be fake. I know he said it was a game. But you don't get to look at me like that and then act like nothing's happening. He froze. That look, I continued. You don't do that with just anyone. His jaw clenched. You don't know that. I do, I shot back. I know you. For a moment, I thought he might argue. Instead, he whispered, that's the problem. The words hit harder than I expected. I'm straight, he said suddenly, like he needed to convince himself. I've always been straight. This dash, he gestured between us. This isn't supposed to be confusing. I laughed, sharp and humorless. And yet, he stepped closer, not touching, just close enough that I could feel the heat of him. This can't go there, he said, because if it does, I don't know how to walk it back. I looked up at him, my heart pounding. And if it already has, his breath hitched, just slightly. That was all the answer I needed. He turned away first. I'm going to bed, he said. I stood there long after his door closed, staring at the empty space he'd left behind. That night, I finally admitted something I'd been avoiding since that first fake kiss in the bar. I wasn't just afraid he was confusing the game with reality. I was afraid he already knew exactly what he was doing. The next few days were brutal in the quietest way possible. Chris avoided me. Not obviously, no slammed doors, no cold shoulders, but in that careful, deliberate way that hurt more. He adjusted his schedule so he barely crossed paths. Left early, came home late. When we were in the same room, conversation stayed surface level. Safe, empty. But the act? The act was flawless. At work, he was still attentive, still affectionate, fingers brushing my back as we passed in hallways. His hand finding mine automatically during meetings. Anyone watching would have sworn we were solid. Happy even. That contrast nearly broke me. One afternoon, after a meeting ran long, we ended up alone in the elevator. Just us. No audience. The door slid shut. Chris stared straight ahead, jaw tight. So this is how it's going to be? I asked quietly. He didn't move. How it's going to be? You touching me like you mean it in public, I said, and pretending I don't exist at home. His reflection flickered in the mirrored wall. I saw his throat bob as he swallowed. We can't talk about this here, he said. Why? I shot back. Because someone might overhear? Or because you might have to admit something? The elevator dinged. Doors opened. He stepped out without answering. The thing I hadn't anticipated was jealousy. I wasn't prepared for how it would feel when Chris started bringing someone else around. It started innocently enough. A guy from the gym. Just a friend, Chris said casually one night, grabbing a beer from the fridge. He might come by later. I nodded, pretending it didn't matter. It mattered. The guy Evan was nice. Easy smile. Too comfortable sitting on our couch. I watched from the kitchen as Chris laughed at something he said. That familiar smile back on his face. The one that used to be just for me. I felt stupid, possessive, out of line. We weren't real. We never were. And yet, when Chris casually mentioned that Evan might crash over sometime, something inside me snapped. Does he know? I asked. Know what? Chris replied. About us, I said. The fake part. Chris stiffened. Of course. And the real part? I pressed. He looked at me then, eyes sharp. There's no real part. The lie sat heavy between us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything the touches, the looks, the way he'd hesitated every time I pushed too close to the truth. I wondered if I'd imagined all of it. If I projected something that was never there. Then sometime past midnight, I heard his door open. Footsteps. Slow. Hesitant. A knock on my door. I sat up, heart pounding. Yeah. The door opened just enough for him to step inside. Chris didn't look at me at first. He closed the door behind him carefully, like he didn't want the sound to travel. "I shouldn't be here," he said. I swallowed. "Then why are you?" He finally met my eyes. "Because I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, voice low. "And I hate that." The room felt smaller. "Hotter. You brought someone else into our space," I said quietly. "That didn't bother you?" "It bothered me more than it should have," he said immediately. "Too fast. Too honest." We stood there, a few feet apart, neither of us moving. "This was supposed to be fake," he continued. "But every time I touch you, every time I look at you, it feels dash," he broke off, shaking his head. "I don't recognize myself anymore." I got out of bed, closing the distance between us. "Then stop pretending you don't," I said. His breath hitched. For a moment, I thought he'd back away. Instead, he reached out. His hand hovered near my arm, not quite touching. "Matt," he warned softly. I covered his hand with mine. The contact sent a jolt through both of us. "This is where the game ends," I said. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the fear was still there. But so was the choice. He kissed me like someone who'd been holding his breath for too long. Not rushed, not clumsy, just real. And in that moment, I knew whatever we'd been pretending before, this wasn't part of the act anymore. It was the point of no return. The kiss should have answered everything. Instead, it made things messy. Chris pulled away first, forehead resting against mine, breathing uneven. His hand was still on my arm, like he wasn't sure what to do with it yet. "Damn," he muttered. I almost laughed. "Almost. That's your takeaway?" I asked quietly. He huffed out something between a laugh and a groan. "No, I just dash." He stepped back, running both hands through his hair. "I don't know how to do this." I folded my arms, suddenly very aware that my heart was still racing. "Then don't." He looked up at me. "What?" "Don't do it halfway," I said. "Don't kiss me like that and then disappear again. I can't go back to pretending this didn't happen." He nodded slowly, like he was absorbing the weight of it. "I'm scared," he admitted. That stopped me. Chris didn't say things like that. Not out loud. Not without a joke wrapped around them. "Of what?" I asked. He hesitated, then finally said it. "Of liking you more than I'm supposed to." The words settled between us, heavy and undeniable. "You don't get to decide what you're supposed to feel," I said. He gave a short, bitter smile. "You say that like it's easy. I say it like it's honest." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped back toward the door. "I need time," he said. "Just give me time." I wanted to argue, to pull him back, to demand something concrete. Instead, I nodded. "Okay," I said. "But Chris..." He paused, hand on the doorknob. "I'm not pretending anymore." He met my eyes. Something raw flickered there. "Me neither," he said. Time, it turned out, didn't make things clearer. If anything, it made everything louder. Chris stopped bringing Evan around. Stopped mentioning him at all. At home, we were careful, almost shy. No tashing. No late-night talks. Just long looks that said more than words ever could. At work, though, nothing changed. If anything, he leaned into it harder, holding my hand longer, pressing his thumb into my palm when no one was looking, standing just a little too close during meetings. One afternoon, a coworker joked, "You two ever get sick of each other?" Chris smiled easily. "Haven't yet." I didn't miss the way his fingers tightened around mine when he said it. That night after dinner, he finally broke. We were washing dishes together, our usual unspoken routine. The water ran. Plates clinked. The normalcy felt surreal. "I told my sister," he said suddenly. I froze. "Told her what?" "That I'm figuring some stuff out," he said. "About myself." My chest tightened. "And..." "She laughed," he said, shaking his head. "Said it took me long enough." I stared at him. "She knew. She said she always thought I was too intense about certain guys," he replied. "She asked if there was someone specific." "And what did you say?" He turned off the water and faced me fully. I said yes. The silence was electric. "Did you say my name?" I asked. He nodded once. Something inside me cracked open. We didn't rush into anything after that. There was no dramatic declaration. No sudden labios. Just small, deliberate steps. A movie night that turned into his arm around me on the couch this time, with no one else to see it. A shared look that didn't need explaining. his hand finding mine at home, not for the benefit of anyone else. One night, lying side by side on his bed, staring at the ceiling, he finally said it. You know, we can't keep pretending at work forever. I turned my head to look at him. I know. People will talk. Let them. He smiled softly. You've always been braver than me. I reached for his hand. You're catching up. He squeezed my fingers. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. We'd started this whole thing by pretending to be something we weren't. And somehow, along the way, we'd become exactly that. Not because it was useful, not because it benefited us, but because one of us stopped confusing the game with reality, and the other finally stopped running from the truth. Coming out at work wasn't the big dramatic explosion I'd imagined. It was quieter, stranger, almost anticlimactic. Chris was the one who pushed for it not all at once, not a company-wide announcement, but small corrections. Subtle honesty. The first time someone called me his roommate, he didn't laugh it off. He's my partner, Chris said easily. Just like that. I felt the words settle into my chest, warm and terrifying. The guy blinked, shrugged. Cool. And that was it. Later in the car, I finally said, "We didn't even look at me before saying that." Chris smiled, eyes on the road. Didn't need to. That was when I realized something important. The pretending had taught him how to be brave. He'd practiced the gestures, the words, the closeness long before he was ready to admit why it felt so natural. The real risk wasn't being seen. It was being honest. Not everyone reacted smoothly. Our boss was awkward, overly supportive in that stiff corporate way. HR asked questions they absolutely didn't need to ask. A couple of coworkers went quiet around us. But none of that compared to the first time Chris introduced me as his boyfriend outside of work. We were at a bar with his friends from college guys I'd only heard about in stories. Loud, familiar, clearly expecting someone else. "This is Matt," Chris said, hands settling on my back. "My boyfriend." There was a pause, a couple of raised eyebrows. Then one of them laughed. "About time." Chris blinked. "You knew." "Dude," his friend said. "You've been weirdly intense about him for months. We thought you were already together." I bit my lip to keep from smiling. Chris just shook his head, half embarrassed, half relieved. That night, walking home, he said quietly, "I spent so long scared of being wrong about myself that I never considered I might just be late." I squeezed his hand. "You still showed up. We didn't lose the benefits. The project went through. The stipend stayed. But the power dynamic shifted. Now, when Chris kissed me in public, it wasn't for show. When he held my hand, it wasn't strategy. And when we argued, because, yeah, we did argue, it was about real things. Boundaries. Expectations. Fear. One night, months later, lying tangled together on the couch, Chris laughed softly. "You know what's messed up?" "What?" I asked. "We were better at communicating when we were pretending," he said. I snorted. "Because you're bad at vulnerability." "Because I was scared," he corrected. "Now I actually have something to lose." I turned to face him. "You're not losing me because you're honest." He studied my face, then nodded. "I know. Sometimes I think about that first kiss in the bar. How fake it was supposed to be. How real it felt anyway. We didn't fall in love by accident. We fell in love because proximity turned into intimacy, because pretending turned into practice, and practice turned into truth. And, yeah, one of us definitely started confusing the game with reality. The funny part? The other one had been living in reality the whole time. He was just waiting for Chris to catch up. I used to think the hardest part was getting Chris to admit what he felt. I was wrong. The hardest part was watching him learn how to live with it. Once the adrenaline wore off, once the novelty of newly out, faded real life crept back in. Routines, stress, old habits, and with them, old fears. Chris didn't regress, not exactly. He never pulled away from me, never pretended we weren't together. But sometimes I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed before holding my hand in unfamiliar places, or the way he went quiet after certain comments from people who didn't mean harm but still didn't understand. One night, after dinner at my parents' place, he barely spoke on the drive home. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded automatically, then sighed. "Yeah, just processing." My dad had been polite, warm even, but I knew Chris had clocked the moment when he'd said, "You boys," instead of "you two." It wasn't cruel. It wasn't intentional, but it mattered. Later, lying in bed, Chris stared at the ceiling, jaw tight. I hate that I noticed those things now, he said. Like I unlocked a new level of awareness I can't turn off. I rolled onto my side, propping my head on my hand. Welcome to the club. He glanced at me. How long did it take you to get used to it? I didn't sugarcoat it. You don't. You just stop letting it decide how big you're allowed to be. He was quiet after that. Then he said something that surprised me. I keep thinking about the game. I raised an eyebrow. The fake relationship? Yeah, he said. How easy it was to perform. How confident I felt when I thought none of it was real. And now it's real, he said softly. And I'm more scared than I ever was pretending. I reached for his hand, lacing our fingers together. That's because now you care about the outcome. He turned toward me fully. What if I screw it up? I smiled, small and honest. You will. So will I. That's not failure, that's just being in something real. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for months. The moment I knew he'd crossed some invisible line was stupidly mundane. We were grocery shopping. Just us. No coworkers. No friends. No audience. A kid in the next aisle started crying, and without thinking, Chris leaned over and whispered, "We should never have kids." I laughed. Agreed. Then he froze. Turned to me. I mean dash. You meant we? I said. He searched my face, bracing for panic. For correction. Instead, I smiled. He swallowed hard. Yeah, I guess I did. From that point on, something shifted. He stopped overthinking every step. Stopped waiting for the ground to give way beneath him. Not because the fear disappeared, but because the joy finally outweighed it. A year after the stipend application, we went back to the same bar where it had all started. Same sticky floors. Same bad lighting. Same cheap beer. We sat at the bar, shoulders touching. Do you ever think about how insane this was? Chris asked, nodding toward the crowd. All the time, I said. We really thought we could fake something this personal without consequences. He smirked. We were idiots. I turned to him. You kissed me here first, you know. He grinned. Fake quiche. Didn't feel fake. He leaned in, slower this time, deliberate. This one isn't either. When he kissed me, there was no rush. No audience to convince. No benefit to gain. Just us. And that's when it finally hit me we didn't win by turning the lie into the truth. We won because we stopped pretending we weren't already living it. The funny thing about pretending is that it teaches you exactly what you want before you're brave enough to admit it. A year and a half after that first fake kiss, Chris and I stood in our kitchen surrounded by half-packed boxes. Not because we were breaking up, not because something went wrong, because we were moving on purpose this time. Bigger place, more light, a second bedroom we didn't technically need but both wanted anyway. It felt symbolic somehow, like we were choosing space instead of hiding in what was convenient. Chris sat on the floor, back against the cabinets, watching me label a box. You ever think about how close I came to ruining this? He asked. I capped the marker and leaned against the counter. Define this. Us, he said, back when I kept pretending I didn't know what I felt. I considered that. Yeah, but you didn't. He frowned slightly. I almost did. But you didn't, I repeated. And that matters more than the almost. He nodded, absorbing it. After a moment, he smiled. You know what scares me now? What? That one day this will feel so normal I'll forget how hard it was to get here. I walked over and sat down beside him, our shoulders touching. That's not a bad thing. No, he admitted. It's just wild. We stayed like that for a bit, listening to the quiet hum of a life we'd built without meaning to. Later that night, lying in bed, Chris traced idle patterns on my arm like he always did when he was thinking. You never doubted me, he said suddenly. I turned my head. That's not true. I doubted you all the time. He chuckled softly. Okay, fair. But you never doubted this. He tapped my chest. That what we had was real. I thought back to every moment I'd swallowed my feelings. Every time I told myself it was just a game. A benefit. A performance. I said slowly, part of me knew that if it wasn't real, it wouldn't hurt so much. He went quiet. Then he pulled me closer, his forehead resting against mine. I'm glad I confused the game with reality, he said. I smiled. Me too. Sometimes people still ask how we got together. We usually give them the short version. work, timing, friendship that turned into something else. We don't explain how pretending made it safer to want each other, how the lie gave him permission to explore the truth, how one of us fell quietly while the other fought it every step of the way. Because some stories don't sound real unless you live them. All I know is this. We started out playing a role for the sake of convenience. Somewhere along the way, the pretending stripped us bare. And when the benefits were gone, when the rules fell apart, when there was nothing left to gain, we stayed. Not because it was useful, not because it was easy, but because the game ended, and reality was exactly where we wanted to be.